This is George. He's a very successful writer who has financial freedom, and he was one day wandering in the open fields, pondering about his existence and where his life was heading. And he stumbles on a certain field where the sun was shining more strongly than usual. George had always loved summer and sunshine and the brightness of lights, and so the reflection of the sunlight on the fields was just mesmerizing to look at. It felt like magic to him. And he had also always dreamt of living in a faraway place in isolation where he can have his peace. He figured that this was it and decided to figure out a way to live there. George was determined, and he started to build a cabin in the middle of the field. It was all his design, and he was very happy with how it ended up looking. And now that it was done, he got really excited to be living there in the heart of Mother Nature, away from everything and everyone. It was what he was looking for all along. George has really put all of his heart and soul into every aspect of the cabin's modern design to be as comfortable as possible. He installed high-quality protective shutters, and the doors were set up with high-level security. He also made use of his love for lights and brightness and built strong artificial lights in every single room. It was also a very large cabin where he could store enough supplies to allow for complete sufficiency. He rarely needed to visit the city for any groceries. The cabin was exactly how George envisioned. It felt so true to him, and over time, his love for it would only grow as he started to spend more time indoors. Some strange sounds outside would start to really bother him while he was minding his business, and the strong sunlight in the morning would start to get on his nerves and interfere with the lights that he built. So he decided to shut the shutters down and lock them completely, relying only on his own lights. The cabin started to feel like a fortress, and it was kind of scary at times. But that was fine by George, as he was committed to this way of life, isolated and away from everything, just on his own. George felt really comfortable in there. He could spend his time doing the things he was passionate about and had full control over the lighting and the temperature. It was safe and enjoyable inside the cabin, and everything felt easy, to the point that he stopped thinking about the outside altogether. After all, the inside was familiar, predictable, and under his control. The outside, on the other hand, was unknown, unpredictable, and completely out of his control. The fact that the shutters were blocking the outside with only the walls of the house and artificial lights around him made him feel even more safe and isolated from the outside. He never turned off the lights, and he didn't notice how the house became pitch black until they started burning out, and he had no replacements for them. Once the last light went out, George had to find his way around in almost complete darkness. He only had candles light to rely on, which he had to be conservative with since he didn't really have that many candles. Being someone who loved bright lights so much, this was very difficult on George. Yet it was just not enough to overcome the fears he slowly developed over time about leaving the safety of his cabin. Stress was building up, his inner peace was starting to crumble, and the memory of the beautiful sunlight began to fade, never to return again. With less and less lights in reach, the world George built and relied on was falling apart, and he became really lonely in there. He started to realize how he was cut off from everything, and the only comfort he felt was the sense of protection the house afforded him. He didn't know exactly what he was so afraid of and what got him to this point. He was just aware that he has been feeling this way for a long time now. He even stopped doing the things that he loved because of the lack of light. It was so dark, and George too was falling into darkness. One day, George was looking at his library, something that he hasn't done in a very long time. One of the books caught his attention. He hasn't seen this one before. It was talking about a natural, radiant light that existed in the world, more light than one could ever imagine. A light that never ends. This was pretty confusing to him. After all, the only lights he had known and remembered were what he used in the cabin. How is it possible that such an endless light existed, he wondered. George was in disbelief, but he continued reading. The book described how this omnipresent light shines everywhere all at once. It fell on everything constantly and evenly. George had no frame of reference for understanding this. The concept felt really foreign. But the next thing he read touched something deep inside of him, something he didn't feel for a long time. He didn't even realize that he had felt that before, in a distant life, a time he wasn't able to remember. The book described how this endless light exists in the outside world, beyond the dark world George was in, beyond the confines of his cabin. George realized all at once that he will never feel the abundance of the endless light the book was talking about. How will he ever be able to go to the outside world when he is so dependent upon what he has built inside? The idea felt like a distant dream, that the light is so far out of reach, even though all he actually needed to take is just one step. George was now completely imprisoned by the same thing he created to break free. When we are kids, we are free, curious, and full of joy. We want to explore the world, and we tend to be open to many different experiences. Nothing holds us back nor stands in our way. We are just living in the moment. And this is what the open fields and the endless sun represent. As we grow up, life happens and we start to face different traumas that hurt us deeply and change our perception of the world. These negative events subconsciously take a hold on us as we become more and more fixated and obsessed about them. We become extremely narrow-minded and constrained by these events, with our thoughts and beliefs revolving almost only around them. We start building barriers in the shape of fake personalities, lifestyles, social masks to cover and avoid the pain and protect ourselves. And this is what the cabin represents. We sabotage ourselves by listening to what our minds are telling us about the experiences that cause us pain, and we become prisoners to the mind. We start to assume that there is no way out, even though the key to everything is right in our hands. We just have to look closely and from a different angle. Most of our issues and problems are created by our own minds. It's not that real problems don't exist in the world. They do, but our mind makes them much bigger, dwelling and fixating on them even when these problems have happened a very long time ago. And what at first might seem like a way for our minds to protect us and avoid the pain ends up being the exact same thing that would cause us even more pain in the future. Our minds are really just that powerful. When we stop for a moment and breathe and notice what our mind is doing and how it works, we realize that the outside world, where we are free, where we can feel joy and happiness, is still there. We are just focused on this small negative part of our reality that we get stuck into, not knowing how to get out. Realizing how our minds work can help us get out by letting go of this inner prison that we build and shift our perspective to see that there is so much more to life than our subjective past negative experiences. We just need to accept and let go of our inner darkness and reach for the light that never ends. The sun never stops shining. It doesn't differentiate between people. We are the ones who stop looking in its direction.